I was a cleaner in a billionaire's library. Every night, I secretly reorganized his books, against my boss' orders. I thought he never noticed, then he called. His study. I know what you've been doing. I froze in fear. Part 2, Expensive Ones. With a prescription that suggested someone who spent a lot of time with books. Sometimes I'd find multiple bookmarks scattered around, as if he was reading several books, simultaneously. This wasn't someone who collected books as decoration. This was someone who actually read them, who lived with them, who needed them. One night, I found a notebook beside his chair filled with handwriting I assumed was his. The pages I could see contained what looked like booknotes, quotes, thoughts, reactions to whatever he was reading. The handwriting was precise but hurried, like someone trying to capture ideas before they escaped. I didn't read it. That would have been a violation too far. But seeing it made me feel less alone in my literary obsession. Somewhere in this mansion was another person who thought books were worth taking notes about, worth having conversations with. Even if those conversations were one-sided, it made my secret curation feel less like trespassing and more like collaboration. 3 weeks into my unauthorized library reorganization project, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was shelving some poetry I'd found scattered across 3 different floors when I noticed something odd. The books I'd been recommending weren't just disappearing. They were being returned to specific spots, not random places, but carefully chosen locations that suggested someone was building their own organizational system. The Toni Morrison I'd suggested after he read James Baldwin was now shelved with other African-American literature. The Barbara Tuchman history I'd recommended was grouped with other narrative nonfiction. Someone was not only reading my suggestions, but integrating them into a larger collection strategy. Emboldened by this evidence that my recommendations were being appreciated, I began leaving more detailed notes. Instead of just suggesting books, I started explaining connections between authors, themes that linked different works, historical contexts that might enhance understanding. When I found him reading 1984, I left Brave New World with the note about dystopian literature, and how Orwell and Huxley had imagined different, but equally terrifying futures. When he finished a biography of Marie Curie, I suggested The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, with thoughts about science, ethics, and the stories we tell about discovery. My notes grew longer, more personal. I found myself sharing not just what books he might enjoy, but why they mattered, what they'd meant to me, how they connected to larger conversations about humanity and art, and the way we live. I was having the literary conversations I'd always dreamed of, even if they were completely one-sided. Then, one night, I found something that made my heart stop. Beside his reading chair was a new notebook, different from the one I'd glimpsed before. This one was open to a page that was clearly meant for me to see. In that same precise handwriting, someone had written to my mysterious librarian. Your recommendations have been extraordinary. Your insights thoughtful and illuminating. I find myself looking forward to discovering what you'll suggest next. Thank you for helping me see my own collection with new eyes, a grateful reader. I stared at the note for a full 5 minutes, my hands shaking as I held my dust cloth. He knew he'd known all along, and instead of being angry, he was grateful. I looked around the library with new eyes, suddenly aware that this wasn't just my secret anymore. Somewhere in this vast house, someone was paying attention to my work, appreciating my passion, engaging with my ideas. For the first time since I'd started working at the estate, I didn't feel like an intruder, I felt like a collaborator. That night, I left a longer note than usual along with my recommendation. I suggested The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. And I wrote about the magic of libraries, about books that find their readers, about the way stories can create connections between strangers. I signed it for the first time with my real name, Carrie. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was getting home from my shift. I'd been working at the estate for 7 months, and my secret correspondence with Mr. Lane had been going on for nearly 2 months. I'd grown comfortable with our literary exchange, even bold enough to occasionally disagree with his reading choices in my notes. Miss Michaels. The voice on the phone was crisp, professional. This is Margot, Mr. Lane's personal assistant. He'd like to see you in his study this afternoon at 2 p.m. My blood turned to ice water. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Lane would like to meet with you today at 2 p.m. The address is I know the address, I said weakly. Can I ask what this is about? He'll explain when you arrive. Please use the main entrance. The main entrance, not the service door, I'd been using for months. This was serious. I spent the next 4 hours in a state of panic. He knew about the books. That much was clear from our note exchange. But maybe he'd finally decided it was inappropriate. Maybe someone had complained. Maybe I'd crossed a line with one of my recommendations or comments. I thought about the note I'd left the night before along with a copy of the book. Thief. I'd written about the power of words, about how books could survive, even when everything else was destroyed. Had that been too personal, too presumptuous? I changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a simple black dress that seemed appropriate for either a job interview or a funeral. Given my current situation, it could be either. The main entrance to the Lane estate was even more intimidating than I'd imagined. Marble steps led to massive oak doors that probably weighed more than my car. I rang the bell and waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. Margot turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reassuring smile. Miss Michaels, right on time. Mr. Lane is waiting for you in his study. She led me through halls I'd only seen in darkness, past rooms filled with art that belonged in museums. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and slightly cold, like a very elegant hotel where no one actually lived. The study was different, smaller than I expected, lined with books. Filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that suggested someone actually worked there. There were papers scattered across a massive desk, coffee, cups that hadn't been cleared away, and reading glasses in at least 3 different locations. And there, rising from a chair by the window, was Gerard Lane. He was taller than he had seemed from a distance, and his eyes were the kind of dark brown that seemed to notice everything. He looked tired, I realized, in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. Miss Michaels, he said, and his voice was warmer than I had expected. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. I perched on the edge of a leather chair, my hands folded in my lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here, he said. I have some idea, I said quietly, and I want to apologize. No, I overstepped. I shouldn't have touched your books without permission. And I definitely shouldn't have left notes. I couldn't help myself. He studied me for a long moment and I prepared myself for the lecture about boundaries and appropriate behavior. Instead, he smiled. Miss Michaels, Mr. Lane said, settling into the chair across from me, I need to show you something. He picked up a tablet from his desk and tapped the screen a few times. This is the security feed from the library. I've been watching you work. My stomach dropped. Of course, there were cameras. Of course, he'd been watching. I was about to be fired. Possibly arrested for theft or destruction of property. But when he turned the tablet toward me, I saw something unexpected. The screen showed me from the night before carefully moving books, dusting shelves, and yes, leaving my note by his reading chair. But the way he'd edited the footage, it looked less like surveillance and more like documentation. I've been watching you reorganize my collection for months. At first, I was annoyed. No one touches my books without permission. I was ready to have you fired. I winced, but he continued. Then I started paying attention to what you were doing. You weren't just moving books randomly. You were creating systems, building connections, making the collection more accessible. And your recommendations, he gestured to a stack of books on his desk. Every single one I'd suggested over the past 2 months. They've been extraordinary. I'm sorry, I said again. I know I shouldn't have, he said firmly. Stop apologizing. You've done something remarkable here. You've taken a collection I'd accumulated but never properly organized, and turned it into something functional. More than that, you've introduced me to books I never would have found on my own. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. Can I tell you something, Miss Michaels? Something I haven't told anyone else. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I'm going blind. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my breath catch. It's a genetic condition, degenerative. I've known for 2 years that it was coming. But it's accelerating faster than the doctors predicted. I can still see, but reading is becoming difficult. The words blur together, especially in low light. I have maybe 6 months before reading becomes impossible. He turned back to face me, and I could see the pain in his eyes, not physical pain, but the ache of someone facing the loss of something essential. Books have been my escape my entire life. When I was building the company,